Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and we are looking at the new expansion, Journey to Unguru, as we can now finally look at all the cards. So to see them right now, since they're not out, you go into crafting mode and you go to Unguru, and that's how you can filter just to the new expansion. Last time we looked at Paladin cards, this time we're going to look at the Priest cards and see how they are. First one we have is the quest card. I can already tell because it's a 1-mana legendary card. They are doing a good job, I suppose, of having a lot more 1-mana legendary cards, where previously there was only 1 or 2 in the entire game throughout all the expansions. So this one is called Awaken the Makers. Quest: summon 7 Death Rattle minions. Reward: Amara, Warden of Hope. Interesting phrase, Warden of Hope. So summoning 7 Death Rattle minions is going to be interesting because I haven't seen any great Death Rattle cards in a while, and without Stalag and Fugin, which were part of the Blackrock Mountain, or the Nexramas expansion. I can't even remember which one. I think it was Nexramas. Like, with those being wild sets that you can't play anymore, playing a standard set with Death Rattle doesn't make the most amount of sense. I can't really even name any other cards that actually have Death Rattle. There are 2 cards that improve themselves through Death Rattle. One that gets extra attack and one that causes Death Rattle's cards to happen twice. But summoning 7 is going to be difficult unless almost all of these cards have Death Rattle in them, and I don't think that's going to be the case. And this is a priest deck that this quest is in, so you're talking about making something that just on the face of it seems like the exact opposite of what you would want in a priest deck. Instead of healing creatures and keeping them alive, you're going to make a deck that's the exact opposite of that and designed to kill your own creatures and sacrifice them. Next card we have is a 1-mana spell called Binding Heal. Restore 5 health to a minion and your hero. Well, that card on itself is way better than at least a couple of the current priest cards. And there is the Arachni Soul Priest in the priest deck, unless that card has gotten banned now, and that makes any card that you play that heals instead do damage, and it doesn't do the opposite, so it doesn't make cards that do damage heal, so it just makes everything do damage. So with Arachni Soul Priest and 1 mana, you could potentially do damage to do 5 damage to a minion, but then it would also do 5 damage to your hero, so that's probably not exactly how you'd want to play this card. Otherwise, not using Arachni Soul Priest, though, this is a great card if you have something you want to keep alive, which there are several cards in the priest deck you would want to keep alive and keep their health high, because there are cards that turn the health to equal the attack of some of the priest cards. So there are other cards that heal less and cost more, and those cards are going to get completely replaced with this. This is a direct and obvious replacement card of several cards that have existed in the past. Those other ones are now going to be like pointless. There won't be a reason to have them in your deck unless you just want more heals. And frankly, you can't really win with a priest if 20 of the 30 cards that you are playing are built around healing. Next card we have is a 1-mana, 1 attack, 1 health elemental called the Crystalline Oracle. Death Rattle: copy a card from your opponent's deck and add it to your hand. So this is a Death Rattle card, and it is an elemental card, so there might be some synergy both on the fact that it's an elemental and on the fact that it's a Death Rattle. They may even in the future have a card that says summon a random oracle or summon a random crystal character. So there's potential 4 different ways this card might synergize in the future, and 2 different ways right now that it will synergize. That being said, this death rattle is not one I particularly like. Copying a card from your opponent's deck and adding it to your hand is just extremely random, and it just gives you a card that you have no idea what it's going to be. It could be a 10 mana spell that does nothing helpful. It could be a 1 mana spell that barely does anything useful. Next card we have is a 2 mana, 2 attack, 3 health elemental called the Radiant Elemental. Your spells cost 1 less. Now, for a priest, that's slightly less useful than a mage. You will do spells under a priest deck, but not as much as you would in a mage. And reducing a spell cost by 1 isn't super helpful, because you may only do 2 or 3 spells in a priest deck. You might not do any. But it is an elemental, so it might synergize there. And the quest is to do death rattle cards, so it doesn't help towards that quest at all. Next thing we have is a 2 mana spell called Shadow Visions. Discover a copy of a spell in your deck. What's interesting about this one is you could potentially drain your deck. Now, in Yu-Gi-Oh! A card game, there is a specific way where if you draw 5 specific cards, you will automatically win the game. And one of the ways you could to improve your chances of doing that was to eliminate other cards from your deck, draw them out, and thus have less options and try and win here. There's never been anything like that in Hearthstone, and this actually doesn't help with that at all, because it doesn't drain your deck at all. So that whole story was pointless. It just took me a second to realize it, because it gives you a copy of the spell in your deck. So if you play this on your first turn, there will be 29 cards in your deck, and you'll just get an extra card. It does do the opposite, however, because it gives you 1 extra card, which, well, no, it doesn't do the opposite either. Man, I'm not thinking straight today. It's late. What can I say? You would still be at 29 cards. You would just get an extra card in your hand, which is slightly helpful, but not that great. And it is possible that if you had 2 of these in your deck, on the second turn you play this and you just get another copy of this. And then on your third turn you play this and you could potentially get another copy of this. And on your fourth turn you could play this twice and get 2 more copies of this. Like, you could constantly do it, and unless there's some other character on the field that would be reacting to the fact that you cast a spell, something that got a +1 attack or +1 health or something, or did damage to an enemy hero every time you cast a spell, there's no real reason why you'd want to do that. So the crazy ways to use this spell, and there are some crazy ways that are getting opened up, just slightly creaking open the door just so you can peek through some kind of weirdness where you might have just a spell card twice in your deck and no other spell cards. There is a possibility to do something really crazy with that, but right now it's highly unlikely. Instead, what more than likely will happen is you'll have 2 of these, you'll get some other spell cards, they'll do whatever they're going to do and not really synergize that much. Moving on, because I spent way too much time on that card. Next we have is a 3 mana, 3 attack, 3 health creature called the Curious Glimmer Root. Battlecry, look at 3 cards, guess which one started in the opponent's deck to get a copy of it. So I was going to say look at the top 3 cards of your deck, because that's the only time they've previously had you look at 3 cards. Or they'll say discover a card, and whenever they say discover a card, you are given 3 options by default, and they've never expanded that to say discover out from 4 cards, or discover with 4 options, or discover with 5 options. When discover was first announced, and I hadn't seen it actually played, I thought for a second there it might actually allow you to pick from a large selection of cards, and I was trying to figure out how they would have a player do that in a quick fashion, and that's not what they did. They gave you 3 options. And so this is going to give you 3 cards, 2 of which are going to just be random, and 1 of which is going to be in your opponent's deck. The weird thing here is you probably will succeed at this game more often than not, because unless they adjust it to give you 3 cards that are specifically for your opponent's class, or neutral cards, they very often will give you, say, a mage card, a paladin card, and a hunter card to pick from, and you'll look at the opponent and go, well, he's a mage, so it has to be the mage card, because there's no way whatsoever that they would have had a paladin or hunter card in their deck. That being said, you're just getting a copy of it, so it's probably not going to be that useful, and it's going to be pretty random. But it's 3 mana for 3 attack and 3 health, so it's very much on the power curve. When you see a 3/3/3 with an extra ability, that's pretty good. Still, it's not underpowered. Next card we have is a 3 mana, 2 attack, 3 health creature called the Mirage Caller. Battlecry: choose a friendly minion, summon a 1/1 copy of it. That can sometimes be very useful, and sometimes it isn't useful at all. It kind of depends on what you're planning on copying. So this has to synergize with some other card. Now, some cards have things where their health and attack are increased when you heal or when you play a spell under priest cards. If that's the case, having a 1/1 copy of those cards is actually very helpful and might easily lead to victory. While other cards don't have that, and so if you made a 1/1 copy of something with no special ability, then you just have a 1/1 copy of it. Moving on, the next card we have is the 4 mana, 2 attack, 6 health creature called the Tortellini Shell Raiser. Taunt and a death rattle, give a random friendly minion +1/+1. This does help with this death rattle quest, but I still don't feel like there's enough cards here to do that. Most of the death rattle cards are going to be neutral cards anyway, so I want to search that when we're done here. Otherwise, giving a random friendly minion +1/+1, well, generally helpful. Is not especially helpful under the priest cards. But no, I think I probably wouldn't want to play this card. There's just too much. It's a little weak here, and I would have preferred a 4/4 with taunt and give a random friendly minion +1/+1. Actually having 6 health is on the 4th turn is probably not much better than having 4 health on the 4th turn with taunt. If I was to just randomly guess right now and think about it, I think I would more often than not prefer to have two extra attack. So I would say this is slightly below the curve. This might be the first card that just on the face of it I wouldn't want to play, while the others they at least in some strategies make sense. Next card we have is the 5 mana legendary creature called with 3 attack and 5 health. It's an elemental legendary called Lyra the Sun Shard. Whenever you cast a spell, add a random priest spell to your hand. This would be very useful if the quest was to cast a certain number of spells, but it isn't. But let's see. You're kind of at the same issue, aren't you? Without some synergy with elemental cards, which I still haven't seen that yet. I think we're going to see a lot of the synergies starting to lock into place when we look at the neutral cards at the end. It's kind of a weak card at 3 attack. And getting spells, getting a random priest spell every time you cast a spell, doesn't make the most amount of sense. Let's say you play this on the 6th turn. You spend 5 mana from that. Let's say you have a 1 mana spell. You play that 1 mana spell, well then you've got no mana to play any more spells. You play it on the 7th turn. You play a 1 mana spell. You have 1 mana left to spend. Well, it gave you a random spell. What's the odds that that random spell costs 1 mana? Pretty low. You play this on your 10th turn. You spend 5 mana to summon this. You spend 1 mana to cast a spell. You're given a random spell. The odds are still pretty low, even on the 10th turn, that you will get a 4 mana spell or less. And that's kind of where the numbers fall apart here, is you're never going to have more than 10 mana unless you do something really crazy. And there's still a good chance you get a 5 mana, 6 mana, 7 mana, 8 mana, 9 mana, 10 mana spell that wouldn't be playable in that same turn, even on the 10th turn. Next card we have is interesting that it's a rare card instead of being like a legendary for 8 mana. It's an 8 mana spell called Free from Amber. Discover a minion that costs 8 or more and summon it. So what's crazy there is it's going to be any random minion that costs 8 or more summoned for free. I think this is an extremely overpowered card. Like, extremely overpowered. Let's see. When we go here to all cards and we click here to filter to 8, and then you start to look, you have this one could get summoned, this one could get summoned. All of these are legendaries, like this one, this one, this one, and that's just the first character. This one could be summoned, this one could be summoned, this one could be summoned. You're talking practically every single really powerful, amazingly strong character that cost 8 or more, and you're just going to be able to summon it for 8, which is going to cause a lot of craziness. Just a lot of craziness. Like, when you look at just the neutral cards, you have one that has charge, and his battle cry wouldn't actually activate because he would be summoned differently. You're gonna have this character, this character, this character, this character. Yeah, so much synergy, so much craziness is gonna happen here. Like, insane things. You potentially could get a 12/12 character. At the end of your turn, put a minion from your battlefield onto the deck. That is definitely a card you're going to want to play. So the other thing I wanted to do is, let's unsearch here so we can look here on the neutral cards. I want to search the word death. And let's see if that brings out all the things with Death Rattle. So the quest for the priest was to play Death Rattle cards. And in neutral, most of your Death Rattle cards exist. There's 10 here that you can pick from. 10 here. I'm going to just assume every single one of these cards has the Death Rattle thing and doesn't have the name or the word death in the name. A lot of them have battle cry and death rattle things. This one actually gained +1/+1 for each death rattle minion. So 10 there. Or actually 9 there. I just pointed out that there was one. But Stalag and Fugan in particular, which are from Nexramas. Now I can look at it. And here we have the clan system that they just introduced in what was it? The Mean Streets of Gadgetzan, and I kind of wish that they had done more of that. And it doesn't seem like they have in this new expansion. So you've got a decent number of Death Rattle things to play, you would think. But then when you come over here to Standard and eliminate all of the Death Rattle things from Nixramas, let's get to the realistic number here. You've got 10 here, 20, 30, 40, 49. 49 Death Rattle cards to pick, each of which has some weird Death Rattle things that don't very much synergize. So there is enough to make a standard deck with Death Rattles, but not as much as I would really like, frankly. And if you're going to go with Priest things that have Death Rattle in them, you've got 4 if you're playing Standard. If you go all the way to Wild, you have 5. It's like, okay. So that quest seems extremely unlikely to get played. Anyways, that's it for this Priest cards. Next time we'll look at the Rogue cards. As always, if you're watching live, stay tuned. Otherwise, as always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend or follow me on basically any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.